All right, everybody, welcome to today's live stream. Today is Thursday, February 12th, and we have so many things going on in the world of geopolitics. And we're going to have an exciting show today talking about China, its plan for 2026, some of the biggest storylines that are coming out here. And as always, I want to bring in a special guest to the show, Alex from Reporterfy Media. Alex, how are you today, bud?
Doing great, Cyrus. Doing great. Absolutely fantastic day to do a geopolitical chat with you, my friend.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Alex is joining us live from Chongqing. And Alex, I mean, let's start the show off on just a little bit of a more lighter note. How are things in Chongqing? You guys are getting ready for the Chinese New Year celebration this weekend. I'm sure some beautiful drone shows, some amazing stuff going on in the city. Just tell us the latest vibe from Chongqing.
Yeah, exactly, Cyrus. This is the largest human migration on the planet. There's been estimates of 500 million people will be moving around the country here over the next few days. It's going to be hard to get train tickets, plane tickets. Everything's going to be maxed out. So we feel the push, the rush. It's here. It's electric. It's China.
Yeah, so good. I absolutely love it. Yeah, and I love recently I watched one of your videos was the drone videos, kind of the behind the scenes of everything in Chongqing. And I think there's there's an interesting story I wanted to start off there, Alex, is that, during that video, one of the things that I picked up on is this pride from the drone operator. You had a really great behind the scenes look into this drone show, and what he said is, there's just such a huge responsibility. You have thousands and thousands of drones, the logistics to get that set up in order to do that. And I think that kind of leads into a bigger storyline here, Alex, is just how China continues to adapt. What we've seen right now so far in 2026 is we've seen a record number of trade deals that have been signed by China. No shortage than 6 different leaders from around the world have come to Beijing to sign trade deals. Some of America's biggest allies, including Canada, the United Kingdom. We've seen South Korea, Ireland, France. All of these signing record trade deals. Meanwhile, the United States is continuing to engage in a very, I guess, maybe hostile way would be the way to call that. A very, very aggressive way from the Trump administration. So we're going to have to see how this really plays out in 2026.
Yeah, indeed. It's extremely difficult here to maneuver what attitude Washington wakes up with in the morning. Whether it's tariffs on your country, whether it's, trade negotiations that have been signed and then ripped up, whether it's taking over certain shipping routes, which directly or impact countries like the Panama Canal, or whether it's disrupting, what is part of the BRI. It's hard to determine what's going on in United States of America. Maybe you could give us a little bit more insights on what's going on there, because we're guessing every morning here, Cyrus, in China.
Yeah. Well, Alex, I think this is a really interesting thing. Is it's actually been very difficult to be, working in the geopolitics space like you and I do over the last year, because Donald Trump changes the story so fast. The headlines change so fast. I think there's a big frustration, and I think there was a really interesting thing. I've made some recent videos about this, Alex, on the Davos World Economic Forum, why Canada has shifted over to China, why the United Kingdom has chosen China, and there's a continuous theme that we see is a big word in Chinese culture is consistency. Chinese love consistency. When things are unstable, or 不稳定 in Chinese, if they're unstable, that is not very good for Chinese people. And so I think stability is always a very important thing that everybody wants, especially when you're doing international business, right? You want to have stable trading partners. And I think that was the interesting message from Mark Carney, our Canadian Prime Minister, who said, if we're looking at the United States right now, it's a little bit less stable. And China is proven to be a more stable trading partner and proven to be, diplomatically more stable. You don't have these irrational takes from China. You have, China very much is very, very simple. It's, you're going to provide A for B. We want to do trade. We're not going to lecture you about, your political system. We're not going to try to change your political system. We're not going to try to voice our opinion on what you're doing inside your own country. That's for you and your people to decide. However, you have a resource. We would like to get access to that, and in exchange for that, we're going to provide you with this. And so you have a much more stable approach, Alex. And so I think that's the big word that I would like to use there to describe the United States. It's just very unstable at the moment, which I kind of laugh about, but in all seriousness, I think it really does lead to continuing degradation of America's reputation across the planet, and just how our president is working, and how the United States is conducting its foreign policy.
Yeah, I mean, it makes for a very tricky economy too, because when you talk to the Canadians, I mean, we're a small country. Our economy is not very big, but we are neighbors to one of the most aggressive trading countries in the world. I mean, I was quite impressed with Carney. I don't really pay attention to too much Canadian politics, but it's about time somebody stuck up and said, wait a minute, we can't have this. We can't have this instability with our farmers. We can't have this instability with our automotive industry. Yes, Canada has to accept that innovation is coming in the automotive industry. It's coming by new energy vehicles. They are unstoppable. So whether these regions around the world and countries around the world embrace this technology, they're going to be left behind, and their automotive business is going to be left behind. And once again, they're going to fall on with that typical stereotype where when Americans moved manufacturing over to China, they lost the jobs because it was the Chinese that took the jobs. That's not the case here. This is coming to a shore near you, to a country near you. The new energy vehicles are here. They're coming. They're great cars. They're well made. They're very affordable. And Canada has risen to the challenge here, Cyrus. You know that, right? Just 3% of the imported cars, that's how much percentage it makes of the total annual sales of automobiles here in Canada. But they're testing it out, and they're testing it out with under 35,000 Canadian. Now, most people would say, really? Like 35,000 Canadian? Can I get a car for that? Watch will come to Canada, and this could redefine the whole automotive industry. I'm looking forward to it. And I think Carney's quite brave to bring it in.
I think he is brave. And there's an interesting thing. I mean, you might have heard this story where there's actually Canada is building a bridge from Canada to the United States.
Yeah.
Have you heard this story? Right. So,
yes.
This is kind of the interesting thing. Canada is funding the bridge. They're near completion. And, Donald Trump says, I'm not going to allow the bridge to operate. We're not going to do this. And, the problem with Donald Trump is that he has very little knowledge of the subject. So, I mean, he probably wasn't even aware that there was a bridge being built, but yet he's just, he wants to be like this proud peacock that just struts his feathers and says, you know what, it's my decision. You're not going to allow to open that bridge. And Mark Carney's just like, well, Mr. President doesn't know that we've paid for the bridge. We've already signed all the deals. Everything's going in. And you're going to see exactly what's going to happen. It's a continuous theme of this tacoing out. He's going to, eventually he's going to reverse. But Alex, you brought up something really interesting. You brought up the Belt and Road Initiative. I just found a graph. I want to share this with everybody.
Let's have a look.
So I'm going to bring this up on screen. And what this shows everybody is this shows China's BRI engagement by sector since 2023. And I want you to look at this graph and look at the influx here, Alex, on how this is growing tremendously. So green is the energy. We see metals and mining. We see even real estate, technology, transport. So look at so basically what you haven't heard. We hear in the United States that the Belt and Road Initiative is not working. It's not a good thing. Well, guess what? 2025 was by far the biggest Belt and Road Initiative year ever, with almost $250 billion. That's $213 billion, Alex, in spend, almost double that of any previous year.
Wow.
Now, if we look at the logistics, I'm going to bring this graph down so we can bring us back on camera here, Alex. So if we look at it, Africa was the single biggest recipient of BRI spending, gathering more than 47% of construction spend and 22% of the investment spend. So we know that China, again, they're just stacking geopolitical wins. We're seeing them move very, I would say, maybe not the word is aggressively, but they're very moving very confidently into Africa, building these relationships, and that's an incredible graph when you look at how much sorry, how much growth is going into this and how much investment continues to this day. And the interesting one, and this is a topic that I like to talk about, Alex, is you look at Africa. It's really the only continent in the world that has an actual birth rate that is actually positive and growing very fast. So long story short, Africa is going to be one of the most important continents in the future of our world. You fast forward 20, 30, 40 years, Africa is going to be a major player. And now you have China planting the seeds for more engagement, more relationships. This is, again, China plays the long game, Alex. We know this. This is really kind of their bread and butter is what are we going to be doing? Not tomorrow, not next month, not by the end of the year. Like, for example, in the United States, we've got the midterm elections coming up, Alex, in November. So the whole country shifts towards this short-term story. We know that, Donald Trump's going to have to do everything he can to try to keep the House and the Senate, or else he basically becomes a lame duck president. So you have a lot of distraction within the United States political policy because Trump's going to be focused on winning so he can keep his power. The Democrats are going to be focusing on winning so they can effectively neuter Trump for the remaining 2 years. And China, continues to say, well, you guys do your thing. We're just going to go ahead and, we know what we're doing for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. So we are going to be signing more trade deals and we are going to be, building these relationships around the world.
Yeah, I'm a bit concerned about these midterms elections that are coming up here. Also, there's a lot of division going on in the United States of America. And, well, I'm not going to really mention the what happened in front of the hearings yesterday with the Department of Justice, but division with a capital D in the United States of America, scandalous. This is a country that is just riddled with fraud, riddled with corruption, and it's on all levels. And you cannot be working for the best of the citizens of that country. You see, when China had that problem years ago, they came in, or Xi came in and cleaned up corruption. And this country has been, an economic powerhouse ever since. That will not be tolerated in China. And in America, it's just part of the system. I mean, get into government in America and become a multimillionaire within 4 years of being a senator. How does that happen? I mean, someone needs to explain that to me, because imagine that you're a senator, you're broke, busted, and disgusted, and about 3 or 4 years into your term, you got a great access pass to every golf course in the country. You're building brand new houses with beautiful views in Florida. I mean, how does that happen? Curious.
Oh, I mean, honestly, Alex, I can tell you that, and I know you know the answer to that, but I mean, it's unfortunately there's an unprecedented level of government corruption, and it's really become, what's really scary about this is I have a close friend of mine from Norway. Many of you have, if you're a longtime viewer of the channel, a few years ago, it's coming up on 3 years, believe it or not, I flew to China and actually visited his factory. He owns a clothing factory, him and his business partner. And so I went there, great guy. His name is Tommy. He's from Norway. And he texted me, we talk all the time. So I filmed a video of him a few years ago visiting his Chinese factory in China. And he texted me and he said, Cyrus, the Norwegian prime minister, the former Norwegian prime minister, he was caught in the Epstein files. And he said, this is massive news in Norway. He has had to, he's in a lot of trouble right now with the media, with the press, with the public. And, he has had to resign from numerous things, because of this. And so his big question was, he said, we've seen, leaders in many countries now, being under fire for being caught in this Epstein files. What's going on in America? Why isn't anybody in America being, forced to resign? Why has nobody, there's no consequences going on in America right now. I mean, Alex, the stuff that has come out in the last 2 weeks from these Epstein files is absolutely tremendous in a horrible way. I mean, the stuff that they were doing, the amount of we will not go into the details of that, but the amount of illegal stuff that was happening there, it's actually honestly very scary, to see this play out and to see this happen. And I think what you see right now is, we live in a country in America right now where, as you know, Alex, we had the Super Bowl on Sunday. We live in a country where the performer at the Super Bowl halftime show is a bigger controversy than our politicians and the Epstein files, and that's a true statement. We have, again, and you mentioned one thing, because I think you were interested in talking about this division that's happening in the United States. Our country is the most divided that it's ever been. I feel like that's something I've said to you for years while we've been doing these podcasts, is that every year, it gets more and more, divided, and that it's very hard for America to move forward. And I think that's a big problem for the United States when how do you move forward as a country, right? How do you move forward when when the division is so prevalent right now? And I think that's what you saw, right? Even the Super Bowl, which is really the most iconic sporting event in American history. I mean, it really is the one sporting event that, it's basically a holiday in America. Everybody watches the Super Bowl. This is the finale of the National Football League in America. We had over 100 and, usually around 150 million households tune into this. So it's a very big deal in America. But even that, we can't watch a football game. You now have to have two different halftime shows. And it's like, which one do you support? Do you support the Trump halftime show, or do you support the other halftime show? And whichever halftime show you're watching kind of draws a line in the sand, and it tells everybody whether you're blue, whether you're red. And it's just like, my gosh, we can't even watch a football game without having this kind of division. And that's a sad thing. And I think what we're going to see right now is an unprecedented move towards the midterm elections. Alex, I'm very worried as a U.S. citizen. I think that Donald Trump and his team are going to do everything they can to manipulate this and to steal this election result. I think it's going to be very, 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 very crazy coming up in the next few months as we lead into November.
I'm deeply troubled about it as well, Cyrus. What bothers me the most is that we're seeing an economy that they claim is the hottest economy in the world. Well, if this is the hottest economy in the world, ask the average American who's dealt with inflation. Now, they say they have inflation under control. That is not necessarily true. I mean, there are other inflationary things that are going on right now. If you've seen the metals market, if you've seen gold surpass $5,000 an ounce, if you see silver, it's approaching, again, the $100 an ounce. This is going to come out in durable goods. This is going to come out in automobiles, the cost of purchasing and buying and making automobiles. This is going to come out in copper prices that you need to build homes. So all these things will eventually come out. Now they're saying, wow, we are making billions of dollars on tariffs. Those tariffs are not paid by the exporter. Those are paid by you, United States of American citizens. Every single penny on that tariff is paid by you. So that means less money in your pocket, more money in the government's pocket. And we are talking to the tunes of billions. Now, the Supreme Court has a shot in the United States to push back against the Trump administration and say, hey, guys, these tariffs were illegally put in place. You need to seek approval from the House and Senate. I rather doubt that's going to happen. It might end up on the desk of Trump again, and he may just veto that. Things are going to be very difficult. I'm calling for a market correction coming up here in the second half of 2026. If it doesn't manage to gain momentum and recover after a correction, like I think it will happen in the end of 2026, then you're going to see a down market. And when we see down markets, they last for quite a long time. Just look what happened after 2008.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, I always appreciate your insights into the market, Alex, because we all know that you are a market guy, and you're actively trading as do I. And I think what we're looking at, there's an interesting disconnect, I think, between the stock market and what's happening on the ground here. Because yes, the stock market's, the Dow is above 50,000 points for the first time in history. And you saw an interesting one. I think you were referencing that earlier, Alex, when you said, look at this testimony that Pam Bondi was giving, the U.S. Attorney General, where she was getting questioned on Epstein, and she simply, what you see is an interesting distraction, right? She said, I don't know why are we talking about this? The Dow Jones is above 50,000 points for the first time in history. We should be applauding Donald Trump. We should be praising Donald Trump and realize that we have the hottest economy in the world. But you know what was interesting, Alex? I mean, we've talked about tariffs. I mean, and we've made so many videos on this, and I think everybody knows my stance on the tariff policy. I mean, it just does not work. We've seen Trump, continue to pivot away from his tariffs policy, the tacoing out as he always does against China specifically. But the interesting thing here, Alex, is that an article came out saying that the tariffs cost every single American household last year, cost them an additional $1,000, for their, for tariffs. Now, that might not sound like a lot of money, right? Oh, we got so many millionaires in America. There's a ton of people that can't afford an extra $1,000 hit, right? There's 65% of U.S. citizens live paycheck to paycheck. Okay, they are waiting for that paycheck to come in on Friday afternoon, right? You get paid in America, you get paid once a week, right? So you get a paycheck every Friday afternoon, and if they don't get that paycheck in on Friday, they're not paying their electric bill, they're not getting their gas for their car. I mean, it's a dire situation for a lot of people in America, and an extra $1,000 a year because of an unnecessary policy from the United States that, by the way, that's just one part of it. But, then you start looking at all the cost of all your goods that, have increased. I don't understand where the inflation number comes. I don't understand where people are trying to say that, hey, we're down to 1% inflation in the United States. Everything across the board is more expensive than it was a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. I mean, try to buy some beef in the United States and see what you're paying for that. Just to give you a reference, if you're going in to buy 2 ribeye steaks, if you want to have good quality, high quality, like an organic ribeye steak, that's going to cost you about $75 in the United States right now. That's what that's what it. Unless you're buying low quality. I mean, if that's what you want, you're paying a premium for it, and it's crazy.
It's interesting that you're bringing up steaks and stuff like that. Now, I'm just going to let the average viewer know that cattle is actually now tradable on COMEX and the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. They have pretty much securitized cattle. And there's 4 major companies in the United States that control the market. The average rancher, he's long gone. He wants to actually get you beef for quite affordable price. But this is a controlled market now. Those prices are not going down. They're not going down at all. That's why we're seeing other brands come in. You ever wonder why it costs more money to buy a steak in your own country than some that are imported? That's why. That market is absolutely controlled. The agricultural farming market, totally controlled. Pretty much everything in the United States is controlled, whether it's through BlackRock or other major corporations around United States. All we have to do to look at the tariff impact is look at Amazon's latest numbers. They're not good. And these are companies that employ a lot of people in the United States. They employ a lot and they lay off a lot of people. We are still seeing numbers. And here's something that I want you guys to pay attention. The job numbers did come out on Wednesday and everybody applauded them saying, they are great. Oh, these are wonderful job numbers. AI hasn't affected it. If AI is not affecting job numbers, then there's a problem in AI. And are we going to see a correction in AI stocks that maybe people have just got a little bit too far ahead and thinking that these AI companies are going to be the future? Some have maybe automated certain parts of their business, but I think the day of reckoning is coming. I don't want to sound too, pessimistic about this, but we are most audibly going to see a correction here in the second part of 2026, unless we see the Fed lower the dollar or lower the interest rates down, maybe to 1%. But then you're back into QE, you're back into these 30 or 40-year mortgages. And if you accept that as an American citizen, if you're fine at the age of 25 getting into a 40-year mortgage, and by the time you're 65 paying it off, well, you can thank your administration for that.
Yeah, I mean, Trump has famously said he wants 50-year mortgages. He made a big policy of that. A few months ago, being very vocal about that. Yeah, so I think there's, I actually share a lot of your same sentiment there, Alex, as far as the, hesitation towards AI and what we know. The interesting thing is that whenever there's always hype involved, right? So you have to price in this hype. And I think what we're seeing with these stock evaluations, that's why, yes, okay, the stock market's above 50,000. That is a true statement. Yes, a lot of people have made money on the way up, but at the end of the day, right, when you're investing in stocks, you got to look at solid fundamentals, right? You got to see that, is this company, is this a good stock or is this a good company, right? You can make a lot of money, right? There's a difference. You got to separate yourself as an investor, right? You cannot have, sometimes, and you see that, right? Sometimes people fall in love with the stock and they get blinded by that because they love the stock so much, but they're ignoring the fundamentals of the company, and that's a tough one, and I mean it's a similar situation. I've talked about investing in Starbucks for many years. Starbucks, great stock to own, for a long-term play for many years because of an aggressive China growth strategy. But as soon as that story went away, as soon as, about 3-4 years ago, when their businesses in China started to really go down, the stock started to underperform, a lot of people held on to that stock because it's like, it's cool to be a Starbucks shareholder. Everybody likes Starbucks. I love the stock. And it's like, you know what, you can love the company, you can love the story, but you can't go away with that and just fall in love with that.
Cyrus, I want to add to this. It's funny that you bring up Starbucks. Look at the graph on Starbucks. It's not where you think it is.
It's actually,
and this is the bizarre thing about it. And people, you have to read between the lines here. Companies are dealing with inflation. Share prices are actually inflated as well. Now, Starbucks is cutting down on shops and stores here in China. This is the main power behind their growth.
Right.
And they have, well, knock on wood for them, some time to turn their business around in their own playing field, that is the United States of America. But there's a Chinese competitor coming for them, and it's called Luckin Coffee. And look out, this could change the whole territory of the United States of America. Luckin has got their act together. They had a difficult start back in 2020. Some regulation issues, but they've bounced back and cleaned up the company and had remarkable growth. Now, this is a company that is aggressive here in China, but also now has stores in New York. If you haven't heard of them, check them out. They are also going to go after the Starbucks model. And again, we are seeing these companies that think they are absolutely bulletproof in the United States of America. I have to tell you guys, when Trump was elected, I was actually quite impressed in 2016. I thought, wow, here we go. This is going to be amazing. This is going to bring back the childhood years where I said, the American dream is back. The art of the deal is back. That was one of my first books ever given to me by my parents. It was one of my first books I ever read. And I would think, wow, okay, this is Trump. He's going to bring it back. But you know what, guys? I've actually done a 180 here. And I am not impressed on what's going on here, because this is not the administration that I thought was going to come back in 2024 and say, you know what? They thought we were down and out. We're going to double down. We're going to make America great again. And we're going to do all these wonderful things. What do we got now? We got division. We got a country that is just, divided more than you can imagine. And we have an inflated stock market. I'm going to say it one more time, and that'll be the last time I say it this time in this conversation.
No. I mean, it's an interesting one. And Alex, just to go back on the Starbucks thing, I think there's an important part of that story as well, is that late last year, Starbucks sold about 60% of its business in China to a Chinese company. And so that's, they launched a joint venture, and, Starbucks stock's up about 20% this year, so year to date, the first 6 months, as far as first 6 weeks of 2026, Starbucks has had a nice little rebound, so they've restructured there, but, and that just actually kind of, again, I think it goes to a very important lesson when you're doing business in China, is that you have to have that local knowledge, and you have to have a really good trusted partner. And, you and I have done business in China for many years. It's very imperative that you have these good relationships. So it makes sense that, Starbucks is restructuring their organization in China. They've announced this joint venture with a Chinese company that's going to be able to go in and change how that model works. And like you said, they've reduced stores in China to increase profitability and, to basically change things up and how they're going to do. But you've got the Luckin Coffees, you've got Manor Coffee, you've got, literally dozens and dozens of new coffee brands coming up, which is amazing because I'm a big coffee guy, actually having a cup right now. But it's important because you need to understand how fast things change. And I think when you go back to the stock market now, Alex, I think that there's a tremendous amount of hype. A Harvard researcher came out. There was a Harvard economist, I should say. He came out last year in a very big article, and he said, if you take away the data centers being built in the United States for AI, actually the economy didn't really grow. The GDP growth was near 0%, in 2025, because we don't have this robust economy that people are talking about. It's just that there's a lot of smoke and mirrors because of the valuation of AI. And you look at Nvidia. I mean, I remember Nvidia a few years ago when it became, I believe it was the first company that had a $1 trillion valuation. But the problem here, Alex, is that now a few years later, it's over $4 trillion. So, I mean, at the time, I remember this when it became the first company with $1 trillion valuation, market cap, I should say. And but it's crazy. So what happens is that our the dollar keeps getting weakened, and so yes, you have, potentially you have more money, but that purchasing power is going down. And I think that's what you've mentioned to earlier. Why are people going into precious metals? Because in times of uncertainty, you want to have these hard commodities, these hard assets. And this is why gold has gone to 5,000. This is why, let's see, silver has gone over $100. Even things like, this is kind of a side story. I've actually mentioned this in a lot of talks that I've done. One of the best investments out there, Alex, Pokemon cards. This is the best performing asset class where, dude, they're up like 20,000% since 1999. It's an incredible investment. But I'm saying is that a lot of people have, even in the last 5 years, have bought these cards and they've appreciated tremendously in value because people want to have something physical in their hands because we have so much uncertainty right now. It's a very interesting world that we're living in.
Yeah, I saw a box of O-Pee-Chee hockey cards sell for about 3.7 million US just recently. I agree with you, Cyrus. Let's not forget, though, that there's a lot of market manipulation going on in the markets, too. If some of these stocks or some of these commodities get too ahead of themselves, there are devices that banks or traders use to bring back the market to where they want it to be for reality. So there's a lot going on in there as well. And one thing that I find really remarkable is you'll see these talking heads on CNBC. They'll say, hey, man, if the market's off, buy the dip. How the hell are people going to buy the dip when they're broke? Okay. A lot of people, when markets do go down considerably, like we saw during the pandemic, we saw them plateau, good 40%, .com boom, 80%. Yeah, I just recently did an interview with Gerald Celente. Somebody mentioned him in the chat here. He was reminding me of, what was going on in America in the year 2000, in the year 2008. This market is ripe for it. I'm not going to say it again, but again, let's pivot here because there's something I wanted to ask you, Cyrus, and it's more on a level of what is the sentiment in the United States of America for China? How are the average Americans viewing China in 2026 now?
That's a great question, Alex. I'm really happy that you brought that up, because I think if we look at how the average American views China, I think that it's divided into kind of two camps. I think when you have an older demographic, people above the age of 50, for example, I think that they are, a lot of them, would kind of have these more traditional mindsets where, the biggest thing is you're going to hear about the Chinese government. And I give you an example. I was out with a business client last night for dinner here in Las Vegas. And he had brought a friend, and and I had never met this other guy, and he had found out that this is Cyrus. He's lived in China for many years, and I was telling him that I used to work in China for many years. I go back every summer. We're constantly there, and he said, "Oh, that's fascinating." He goes, "What do the average people in China think about the Chinese government?" And I said, "I'm going to be honest with you here. I'm going to give you some real insight into here." I said, not talking propaganda or anything here, but the average Chinese person is very supportive of the government. And he said, well, why is that, Cyrus? Like, how could they be supportive? They don't live in a democracy. And I said, I got to teach you one thing really important. I said, this is going to help you. I said, you cannot understand China if you look at it from an American lens. Just like Chinese can't understand America when you look at it from a Chinese lens. And so we had a great conversation, though. And at the end of that, I'm going to save the long story. But at the end of it, he really walked away and he's like, wow, that was actually really interesting to learn about this, because I talked about, freedom and how it means different things to different people. I said in China, people don't want to have guns in society because they think if you have guns everywhere, it's not safe, right? It doesn't lead to a safer society. And that's what they believe in. I said, but, in America, that's our belief. So you have, I think, a lot of interesting things. I've noticed a few things. So sometimes people are stuck in that older, demographic where maybe they're just a little bit obtuse and they're just not really thinking. They don't have a lot of knowledge into China. You do have a lot of people that I would say are businessmen. Anybody that I found that's doing business, especially internationally, they get it, Alex. They understand that China is an integral part of the world economy. They absolutely understand that the United States has to do business with China. But I think the most important demographic, obviously, is always going to be the youth, right? It's people under the age of 30, because they are the future generation. And I would say that this demographic is much, much more positive about China. They're very open to China. And the big reason for that is a story that we've talked about so much, Alex, is the exposure that China has had on social media. Then that has been a continuous story for the last 18 months. We've seen China really do something very brilliant here. All they had to do was simply open their doors, right? All China had to do was say, look, we're going to go visa-free to about 45 countries. It continues to expand. I don't know how many it is right now, but I mean, obviously, Keir Starmer went, to have this trade deal with Xi Jinping. So now the UK nationals can go visa-free to China for 30 days. We've seen a similar deal, even with US and Canada, you can get these transit visas. So, China's opening up to the world. People are going there. YouTube vloggers are going there in flocks, literally by the hundreds are going to China, sharing their stories, sharing their general, experiences there. And so I think there's the wall has been torn down. We've seen China. And if we go back just a few years ago, Alex, I mean, at the height of COVID, 2021, China was closed to the world, right? I couldn't go back to China. I mean, you couldn't, you had trouble leaving China without having to do these massive 30-day quarantines. I mean, there was a tremendous amount of, it was a very different, just 5 years ago when China was effectively closed off to the world. And that's a dangerous territory for China, because when it's closed off, people aren't visiting China. People aren't learning about China. And the image of China then begins to decline. But now with these huge soft power wins, I mean, even something as funny as like the Labubu doll, you've heard of the Labubu doll. The Pop Mart has been a tremendous cultural success. I mean, we had a Pop Mart store open in Vegas and people were camping out 24 hours before the grand opening to try to be the first one in to buy a little Chinese figurine. I mean, that's a huge soft culture win. I mean, when you have a Chinese company being able to do that and influence American shoppers, and you're like, wow, that's amazing. Like here in America, people would be so crazy for that. And it went through a whole phase of, a whole fad of that being very big. So, I think that China's reputation, I think, has improved tremendously over the last 18 months, where people are very much, realizing that, hey, look at our president, Donald Trump. Even he realizes that the U.S. economy wouldn't survive without China, hence why he has tacoed out and reversed his tariff policies.
Let me add to that. As you know, I work here for Western China International Communication Organization. And I have to tell you today, our leaders in the company here did a presentation on Chongqing's footprint in global media. And I have to tell you, I'm very proud of the hardworking people here at the company. It's incredible what has happened here in the last few years, especially this city here where I'm at in Chongqing. When I came to the city in 2019, on the Western front, I would say it was not really well known. And one of the leaders for the company here had a vision with me, and we were inviting YouTubers, content creators to come here. And this really started I would say, the social media algorithm for Chongqing
Right.
on YouTube and other platforms. Today, we have over 10 million fans on our Facebook channel. Our YouTube growth is climbing by the millions each year. Our footprint on Google is climbing weekly. So if you think China is done promoting China, I'm going to tell you that we're just shifting into second gear right now. What we have in store for 2026, 2027, remember, China plans in 5-year plans, and the 2 sessions is coming up in March. This is a big time for China. This is a big time for its future. You mentioned that the country was closed during the pandemic. A lot of countries were also closed. At the time I was in Thailand. Thailand decimated its economy. They not only closed, they closed recklessly, not even supporting any of the local businesses. Most went to the wall, and that tourism business is still trying to recover in one of the most popular destinations in Southeast Asia. It still hasn't rebounded. And well, we are here in China, and China understands challenges. But here is where you have set up the perfect point I'm going to make here. You can't look at China through an American or Western lens, as you said, Cyrus. You have to understand that the people trust the government here. The government is for the people here. Now, I'll give you one example. When I was currently in Argentina, I was happily enjoying some wine in a wine shop, and I met an American guy, and he asked where I was from. I said, China. And for the first 20, 30 minutes, everything was fine. And then the questions started coming out, like, you know, social credit system, the usual, right?
Yeah.
The usual stereotypes of China. And it got quite heated in the conversation. And of course, I defend this country because I know a lot about this country. And I love this country tremendously. I wouldn't have moved here if I didn't like it. And of course, this is the greatest city in the world here. But one thing I want to point out is during that, we'll call it debate in a wine shop over a wine tasting, a Chinese girl actually came into the store. And the guy turned around. You won't believe this. The guy turned around and said, "Do you trust your government?" And she's like, "Sorry, what? Do you trust your government? Are you Chinese?" She said, "Yes, I'm Chinese, but I live in Brazil. But what do you mean my government?" And she says, "Do you trust the Chinese government?" She says, "Well, absolutely. Why wouldn't I?" Yeah. And you should have seen on his face. I mean, you have to understand here that this is a country that has over 50,000 kilometers of high-speed rail. That changes people's lives. Imagine instead of getting on an airplane, flying halfway across the country, that you can meet your mom halfway somewhere on a train that goes 350 kilometers for tea. The infrastructure here, the buildings. I just recently went, and I'm going to tell this to people watching here. Yesterday, I went for, I had a bit of a sinus infection, maybe some problems breathing. So I was a bit concerned, and I went to the local hospital here. And I'm going to walk you through this. This is going to shock you guys. So I went in, and we do have insurance here. Most Chinese people have insurance. If not, they can buy additional packages of insurance. But let's say I didn't have insurance, and I'll give you the real numbers. So I walked into the hospital at 2:00 in the afternoon. By 2:10, I was sitting down with a doctor. Now, my first bill was 9 RMB. That's about $1.50 US, okay? Sat down with a doctor who was not just a GP, he was a specialist in, I guess, lungs and sinus issues. He said, let's do a CT scan. Now, you say a CT scan to a Canadian, you're waiting 3 to 6 months, or you say that to an American, you're talking anywhere from $2,000 to $5,000. Well, I got my letter for a CT scan. 13 minutes later, I was on getting a scan on the bed. 30 minutes after that, I had my results. 15 minutes after that, I saw the doctor and got medication. That whole round trip, including medication, CT scan, and the doctor, was $68 US.
Yep, that's
Why do people trust and respect their governments? And as you said, Cyrus, yes, America has great Medicare and medical system if you can afford it.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen actually, this has been one of the trending topics that we've seen on social media, is actually Americans going to China and doing these behind the scenes. These are the videos that are going viral on TikTok. And I think this is where, again, there's a lack of accountability in the United States because, we don't have a healthcare, system in the United States. We have a healthcare industry and profits are maximized. Big pharma is incredibly corrupt. I mean, there's just so much. So it's a very interesting, kind of catch-22. It's like America's great. We have some of the best hospitals and some of the best doctors in the world by far. But unless you have the insurance to afford that, which by the way is not cheap, no matter, so again, if you have the money to afford it, it's great. But I think that's where, you look at China and how Chinese society functions. It's definitely about, that socialist element of trying to take care of everybody, making sure that all boats rise as the tide comes in, right? We want to make sure that every boat, not just the mega super yachts are rising, but we want every boat in the ocean to rise up when that tide comes up. And, Alex, I want to kind of pivot to an interesting graph here, because I think when we're talking about, what is the China's reputation? I found this interesting graph that I think tells a very important picture of, well, what is like America's reputation? And I think this is a very alarming graph here. This is European opinion towards the United States. So we see this across the planet, where this is from the Financial Times. Again, every single one of these. Look at how January 2026 has started.
What a powerful graph! Holy cow!
Yeah, and it's consistent. I mean, and you can see it's an X graph. It's an inversion, right? It crosses almost exactly at the beginning of 2026 when Donald Trump starts his new policies. You look at Great Britain, Denmark, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, all of them are the same. They cross at the exact same point. The blue line, which means that its favorable opinion has plummeted, somewhere between, 10 to 30%. And then, of course, we see the unfavorable is now anywhere from 60 up to 84% for Denmark. Obviously, Denmark being the highest makes complete sense because of the entire Greenland situation. But this is where we also have an interesting situation here, Alex, where a lot of Americans, unfortunately, they don't travel outside of the United States. So there's an attitude of, well, I don't give a crap what Europeans think of us. We like Donald Trump and he's the best for us. But it's a very lonely world when you have your closest allies are no longer wanting to do business with you. And so again, if you're seeing this graph as a Chinese person or as a Chinese government official, you're looking at, for China, I think this is really their view on this. I think a Chinese government officials, if they're looking at that graph, they would just say, guys, this is simply our opportunity and we don't really need to do anything. Right. The United States is currently in a position where it's going to have more political chaos, more uncertainty. And unfortunately, that graph's not going to reverse anytime soon. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to go back to the first graph that we saw is we're going to be pouring in more Belt and Road Initiative. So this is a really big graph. I think that's going to tell a big story here in 2026, Alex, is look at 2025. By far the biggest investment year for the Belt and Road Initiative, incredible engagement from China because they realize that there's a golden opportunity for China to continue to invest. And this is really the economic playbook for China in 2026. There was also another really interesting thing. We often hear that, that China's economy is not doing well, that consumer sentiment, consumer demand is down. People in China aren't spending money. And so one of the interesting things from that World Economic Forum, Alex, is that the Chinese government said, we also want to be the world's factory, which China has been for 30 plus years, but we also want to be the world's biggest marketplace. So what does that mean, Alex? Is it means that China wants to invite more companies to actually come in and sell their stuff to Chinese, to actually increase that consumer demand. So I think what's interesting, Alex, is we talk about these 5, 10, 15-year plans from China. Well, in the next 5-year plan, one of the most aggressive ones is to increase that opportunity for people to increase their consumption. And how do you do that? Well, I think it talks about having a better society. So, for example, when you're not worried about a medical bill and you can get affordable healthcare, you can have the high-speed trains, you can have these basic services that are needed for everybody. You can have access to high-speed internet in China for pennies on the dollar. When you have these basic things and you have a more stable economy, this is how you increase the consumer spending. And, China often does a very good job of hitting those 5-year targets. When they lay out a plan, this is what we're going to do in the next 5 years. More often than not, they hit those metrics. So I'm assuming that China is going to be able to, come very close to reaching that goal. And you're going to see a shift in the consumers as well in China.
I want to add to that just a little bit. This is not, I'm Canadian. I'm not trashing my countrymen. But I have to say, as Canadians, we need to wake up and we need to accept what reality is in this world. We have a very aggressive neighbor that is protecting itself. America first. That's the strategy they're going with. And Canada wherever. Okay. I'm sure if we brought up a graph on Canada, it would be probably similar to Denmark. But Canada and Canadians can do something about this. If you listened clearly to the speech by Mark Carney, it was very clear. Come do business. Come learn about this culture. Try to understand this culture. Now, today, I'm using technology like AI. I use wireless headsets. Pretty much 90% of the time can translate people around me and talking. So I know a lot more what's going on in today's society than I did a few years back. But if you understand that how important China is in the global economy and how much of an impact it can have on you or your family, the best thing to do is next time you're thinking of maybe going to Disneyland or something like that, maybe head over to Disneyland in China and make a week of it. Try to understand it. Try to learn what's going on here. Try to do business with these people because this may bring prosperity. That's why I'm excited for Canada right now. When I was speaking to the media here, I was invited to talk on behalf of some of the media here a few weeks back. I mentioned that I was extremely impressed by Prime Minister Carney. And Cyrus, how many people, when I left the stage, they're like, you know what? This is amazing that our relationships are improving with Canada. These people care. They care about relationships. They care about other countries. This is not the big, bad, evil China that is portrayed in the media that is there, stealing your jobs or taking your economy. These people love doing business. They love their country and they're welcoming all of us with open arms. And it's time that that big shift happens where we used to go to other countries and do business. Well, I think business is now coming back here to China, as you said, Cyrus, the marketplace. It makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Alex. Well, I mean, and I think that's where, I think there's a really interesting thing as well. I don't know if you saw this from a video from Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. This is a really interesting take here. So he came out with a video on February 10th, just 2 days ago. And this is what his tweet says. I don't have it on screen, but I'm going to read it to you guys. He says, thanks to the mutual respect between the President Trump and President Xi, the United States-China relationship has reached a stable but competitive point. Our goal is competition and de-risking, but not decoupling. And it's clear that China must rebalance as well. So this is actually a really interesting, dynamic here because we saw, what we've seen from Bessent. Okay, let's go back a year ago, Alex. Okay, at the beginning of this, the tariff, plan, when he launched it on April 2nd, 2025, he said that, that China has made a big mistake. They have a losing hand and they're playing with a pair of twos. Okay, that was his quote. China has no cards in this, right? They're trying to bluff. They have nothing. He actually said that that the tariffs are going to actually create a situation where we're going to have a group of other Asian nations, including Japan, South Korea, Vietnam, and India. We would work with the United States to basically encircle China and pressure them into a better deal, and make sure that they, we're basically going to try to contain China together, because of their trade surplus. And then he said that, basically when China started restricting China, rare earths, he said that the world's going to step up against China and they're not going to tolerate that. Well, all three of those points have been proven wrong. And the interesting thing here is that we've seen Donald Trump reverse his tariffs. We've seen this encirclement strategy of their Asian nations, trying to encircle and contain China. They're not signing up for that. That's the complete nonsense. And then, of course, when the rare earth ban came out, the United States had to pivot because there's no other way going around it. China is the only country in the world that can process those rare earths to 99.9% purity, which is what you need in semiconductor, cell phones, all of these things we continue to talk about. So it's an incredible admission. And I brought this one up in our last live stream. I'm going to just bring this up again, this graphic. This is so important. I love this one. This is a graph explaining Trump's leverage in the world. On the far left, you have China, which is taco. Trump always chickens out. So out of leverage, he's a 1 out of 10, which is not very good. He does not have a lot of leverage, but you go on the right side of the scale, FAFO, F around and find out. This is where he can be very aggressive towards the Ukraines, towards the Iran, towards the Venezuela. And this is where Trump is able to look like a big man. There was a, famous Chinese political scientist, Jiang Weiwei. He came out with a video yesterday, very interesting, Alex. He said, look at Donald Trump. He's failed in the tariff war. He's failed in the sanction war. He's failed in Ukraine. So what does he do? Well, he goes on this graph and he looks at the one country that he has leverage, and it's Venezuela. Okay, so we kind of need a win here, right? So he goes in, and you know what? It was a good operation. They were able to do it from a military perspective. Yes, you executed very good, but it's also, okay, you executed a military strike against Venezuela, not the strongest military opponent. If we're looking at it on paper, the United States government and the United States military should be able to do that. You'd hope so. You're spending over $1 trillion a year on the military. Again, I'm not justifying it and saying that it was the right thing to do, but it's kind of an interesting one where that's where Trump needed to go in order to get a political win, to try to sell this to his crowd as, look at us, we're big, we're bad, we're awesome, we're winning this game. But again, this is such an important graph, Alex, because all you need to do is understand is where you stand in this poll. China's standing very strong because they know that they ultimately, pun intended, have a trump card against Trump.
Well said, sir. Thank you very much for the coverage. I think what we're going to try to do here is we're going to try to keep it within the hour range, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I just want to say, Cyrus, I show up with about 20 hours of material. I could go on all night with you, but I have to bite my tongue and save it for our next live stream because I got so many things I want to unpack, but I'm trying to stay within that 60-minute zone that you want to.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's keep it nice and short and sweet for our viewers as well. But Alex, thank you so much for your time. And until next time, everybody, thank you so much. We're going to play our outro, and we will see you guys in our next video soon. Thanks, everybody.